The first cry pierced Josiah's chest like a shard of ice in the gloom. It was piercing, frantic, and near enough that the weathered homesteader sensed the chill crawl up his spine before his thoughts caught the echo. He let the lantern slip from his grip. The glass splintered, the light flickered out, but the cry lingered on. Another wail trailed after, fainter, fractured, a pleading murmur slicing through the late-hour breeze. Please, not this way this evening, please! Josiah halted on his veranda. Josiah snatched his shotgun and edged ahead. The pale glow of the moon washed over the clearing, and there, huddled against the rough timber side of his stable, was a young woman. She was youthful, scarcely past the teens, her wide gaze locked on him as though he were the sole anchor in the vast wilderness. Please, don't let them drag me away this evening. Her words fractured on the final syllable. Josiah eased his shotgun down gradually, so she wouldn't crumple there before him. He drew nearer and noticed the tremor in her fingers. He spotted the welts on her forearms. Mess, who's pursuing you? What occurred? She shook her head, barely drawing breath. Her tone sank to a quivering murmur. They mean to haul me back for that right. The crimson eclipse arrives in 3 evenings. I can't return. Not to them. Not to my kinfolk. Her knees gave way and Josiah steadied her just shy of the earth. She gripped his collar with a ferocity fueled by dread. No account, no tale, just raw terror. Beyond them, the gust swept over the plain, but Josiah caught a deeper rhythm within it, like far-off thuds pounding through the darkness. He hoisted the young woman in his arms. He bore her into the stable and settled her amid the bales of straw where the gloom pooled deepest. Remain here. Don't stir. Whatever echoes reach you. Her fingertips tightened on his forearm. Okay. Her gaze implored him to stay, but Josiah eased away and ventured back into the chill, his shotgun primed, his thoughts churning. Come morning, he would learn that shielding this young woman entailed far more than peril in the shadows. It entailed reckoning. It entailed strife. And as the dawn at last broke, 200 horsemen would await beyond his threshold. But poised there in the frosty hush of the wee hours, Josiah couldn't foresee that yet. So the question lingers here. If you stood in Josiah's stead, would you unlatch that gate and shelter her? Or would you turn aside and feign you'd never caught her plea? Josiah scarcely dozed after concealing the young woman in the stable. Each time he shut his eyes, that fractured murmur replayed, "Please, not this way this evening." The hours dragged, thick and unyielding. He strained for those subtle thuds he'd imagined before. When the initial streak of dawn sliced the clearing, Josiah arose at last. He scrubbed his cheeks. His palms trembled faintly. He ventured out, bracing perhaps for a scattering of prints in the soil, perhaps a handful of figures on the distant rise. What met his gaze stole his breath for a heartbeat. The hillock eastward brimmed with outlines, not a pair, not a dozen, but multitudes. Then his sight sharpened further. Multitudes swelled to throngs. Throngs formed a vast, unbroken line of riders spanning the basin. Josiah breathed a single word. Unbidden. Heavens! They perched on top their mounts in utter quiet. Each rider oriented toward his dwelling. Each lance gleamed in the early light like a streak of flame. 200 guardians, all of them hushed. They had pursued her across the wilds well before she neared his plot, and her path had guided them directly to his stoop. They arrayed in a flawless arc encircling his grounds. Too flawless for chance. It evoked for Josiah the ancient tales he'd gleaned in the mounted troops. He had dismissed them once, but encircled by that mute barrier, he questioned his certainties now. Unstirring, unyielding, merely biting for him to venture a step astray. Josiah sensed the soil sway beneath him briefly. His pulse thrummed in his temples. He was no youth any longer. He'd tasted dread aplenty in his days, but not this flavor. These riders weren't rowdy vagabonds. They were resolute, intent, wrathful, convinced he harbored their Vinabsterwuder. He glanced toward the stable. None could see her from this vantage, yet Josiah bore the burden of 200 stares bearing down like fingers at his windpipe. Then the rank of riders stirred, barely a shift sufficient to quiver the ground. From the heart of the hillock one form commenced descending the incline. Composed, deliberate, the poise of one wielding absolute command. The young woman in the stable had alluded to kin, a patriarch, a chieftain, and Josiah knew instinctively this was he. The rider reined in at a remove where Josiah couldn't discern his features sharply, yet near enough to convey the intent. Approach, account for yourself, or we'll advance upon you. Josiah gulped deeply. His hands had ceased shaking. They felt leaden now. He'd endured the dark, but this dawn brought the trial no soul could evade. If he advanced, a single misstep spelled ruin. If he lingered, the outcome might prove graver still. So the sole question remained. What words do you offer a man who believes you've taken his child? Josiah drew one measured breath, then another. His boots weighed like anchors as he strode toward the solitary rider poised in the open meadow. Even the air seemed hesitant to stir. The rider held erect on his steed. He bore silvered locks aglow in the sun and a gaze that never wavered. Years had etched profound furrows in his visage, yet none tempered his edge. This was a soul who'd weathered clashes, interred comrades, and shouldered the toll of every decision etched in his memory. Josiah paused at a respectful interval. He extended his palms faintly to signal he bore no arms. The elder uttered first in a language Josiah couldn't comprehend, a crisp utterance, nigh in order. Then he gestured toward the stable. Josiah's throat parched. He divined the demand. "Where is she? Produce her. Prove she's hale." Josiah raised his chin. He strove for an even tone. "She sought refuge here unbidden. She bore wounds. I merely offered shelter." The elder offered no reply, but his eyes betrayed him. He credited none of it. Ere Josiah could elaborate, motion undulated along the hillock astern, a surge of colors, a repositioning of steeds. Then she emerged, Shara, the young woman from the stable, yet not the cowering form he'd glimpsed the prior eve. Her tendrils were plaited, her garb pristine, her bearing rigid as a rod. They'd found her ere first light and mended her attire and weaves so that she might confront Josiah with grace. She descended toward them with the serenity of one bereft of further alarms. As her mount halted beside her sire, she regarded Josiah with a gentle incline. Then she conversed quickly with the elder. Her timbre was gentler than the night past, yet grave still, laden with candor. She turned to Josiah and at length addressed him in the common tongue. "My sire inquires why you aided me. You knew not of my lineage. You foresaw not the strife in tow." Josiah rubbed the nape of his neck. For an instant, another countenance flickered behind hers, a visage from a quarter century prior, the Navajo maiden he'd felled unwittingly in a foray he could never absolve. The reply was plain. "Because fear gripped you, and no one merits abandonment to the pack, be they prowling on paws or feet." Shara relayed it. Her sire attended. His mien altered, scarcely yet the atmosphere eased. Tension uncoiled, a prolonged, wordless verdict, tipping ever so slightly towards Josiah's grace. But then Shara voiced words that sunk his gut. "My sire deems this mere prelude. He foretells trials ahead. He warns that myriad gazes will scrutinize you ere he deems you ally or foe." Josiah sighed languidly. Precisely the burden his years craved. Further ordeals. If this story holds you thus far, kindly consider following along, lest you miss the ensuing installment.
As you heed, brew a mug of herbal brew and share with me the hour where you're tuned in from these coming few days. Josiah sensed he dwelled within the scope of vigilant stares. On the inaugural eve, they kindled a circuit of flames encircling his plot, proximate enough that warmth seeped through the timbers, yet distant sufficient to spare the hearth. On the subsequent eve, he roused to 6 lances embedded in the loam, each bound with a strand of Lyra's tress. On the tertiary eve, the rhythms commenced at twilight and persisted till daybreak, a cadence so rhythmic and timeless that Josiah felt it resonating in his frame. Whithersoever he roamed, the elevation shadowed him. At times he spied riders perched against the horizon, immobile as boulders. They uttered no word to him, extended no salute, voiced no menace, yet their quietude bore heavier than any shot. Josiah endeavored to work as routine, but routine eluded him. He readied to mount, and unease knotted in his belly. He perceived them aloft, appraising him, deliberating his merit for faith or for the grave. By the quinth morning he was ladling troughs for the steeds when he caught the rumble, not celestial, equine, swift, imminent, surging from the western path. Josiah lowered the pail and advanced, his jaw clenching as he beheld them. 7 horsemen neared this instance. 6 were rugged patrolmen, but the 7th constricted Josiah's breast. Major Harlan Voss, his erstwhile superior in the mounted ranks, a figure who bore malice as casually as others bore a flask. The lead, Thorn, sported a tangle of whiskers and eyes that mistrusted all that drew air. He curbed abruptly and jutted his jaw at Josiah. "Word circulated about you. Reckon you've been fraternizing with Navajo folk that hold water?" Josiah maintained composure. "I sheltered a frightened lass in need, nothing more." Thorn chuckled, but it rang hollow, unkind. His cohort fanned across the yard like curs questing a trace. Josiah felt each tick of time amplify, for he grasped what they overlooked. The Navajo sentinels hadn't departed. They observed from the crests presently, perchance pondering how quickly this tableau might dissolve in crimson. Thorn edged nearer. "We shadowed a raiding band, substantial one. Scent veers straight here, so speak plain. Whither'd they vanish?" Ere Josiah could respond, Harlan Voss urged his mount forward. His timbre was subdued, glacial. "I ken your history, Josiah. You owe the Navajo a reckoning. You claimed one of theirs 65 years agone. Perhaps the hour's come to settle it and yield the lass." Josiah felt the query burrow deep. Should he disclose the sentinels lingered yonder, those 6 would charge headlong to doom. Yet a feeble deceit might alert Thorn, prompting a breach of the stable or a hasty discharge from unease. Lyra had warned this juncture would dawn. Her kin sought to gauge his true mettle, and now his own folk essayed him in their manner. Dual factions tugging the exacting verity, poised to discern his tilt. Josiah retreated a pace, inhaled deliberately, and selected the sole course he could abide. But as he parted his lips to address Thorn, an unexpected turn unfolded, a pivot that reshaped all once more. For prior to his utterance, a call rang from the crest overhead. So, the query persists. What unfolds when rival parties converge simultaneously, and none intends a tranquil retreat? The hail from the crest cascaded through the basin like a peal. Thorn snapped his gaze upward, jolted. His men clenched their firearms tighter. Josiah held firm. He didn't flinch. He'd expected this crux might arrive, but anticipation and immersion were realms apart. Additional riders materialized atop the crest, unhurried, unprovoking, merely manifesting with poised assurance akin to a phalanx of embodied verdict. Lyra led, her sire alongside, both surveying the intruders in Josiah's yard with chill, unwavering scrutiny. Thorn muttered a curse. He stood outmatched, 36-1, perchance greater. Even the boldest discerns when the footing falters. Yet rather than withdraw, he redirected his ire at Josiah. "So this is your allegiance, these souls." Josiah sensed Lyra's glare upon him, her sire's as well, awaiting, assaying, one final probe. He might have held his tongue. He might have professed neutrality, yearning solely for calm. But certain instants forge a soul, and once traversed, they're irrevocable. Josiah advanced. I align with justice, and justice precludes igniting a clash uncalled for. I aided a soul in distress, and should that render me your adversary, then that's the verity you seek. The yard fell mute, even the breeze stilled. Harlan Voss withdrew gradually, his complexion ashen as the stark realities struck. 36-1 wasn't combat, it was entombment. For the first occasion, Josiah glimpsed dread in the one who'd once scorned it. He wheeled his mount, spurred it keenly, and departed sans further barb. His cohort trailed in quietude. None ventured a backward glance at the basin. When they faded, Lyra and her sire descended the crest. She reigned before Josiah, her eyes gentled now, her voice assured. The seer proclaimed that afternoon the omens had shifted, the crimson eclipse ascending swifter than foretold. That eve, the crimson moon crested the basin. The seer appeared, adorned stem to stern in pale clay. The sentinels ringed the grounds anew, their brands forging an immaculate ring of phrase. They insisted Lyra yield for the obligation to appease the wildland shade. Her sire stood stony, riven between the child he loved and an augury predating any breathing guardian. Josiah entered the glow of the flame, knelt to the soil, and laid his weathered revolver in the dust. Should crimson flow, claim mine. I felled her dam with this shot, let this square the ledger. They bound Lyra's wrists before her with untanned cord, and the seer urged the sacred dagger into her grasp as though sealing her doom. Lyra raised the sacred dagger for a breath. Josiah felt the universe hush. The rhythm ceased. The brands hissed as if expectant. Then she severed the bonds, not her flesh, but the thongs encircling her. Her timbers soared over every murmur in the basin. The shade craves no crimson any forth. The shade yearns for clemency. One by one, the 200 sentinels knelt. Not from dominion, not from alarm, but for the inaugural outsider who'd tendered his vitality to preserve one of theirs. Even the seer bowed. The flames encircling them waned, as if the dusk itself had embraced the revelation. Amid the Navajo, one who prefers his essence unbound is held to tread the trail of ancestors. My sire declares the ordeal concluded. You elected the arduous path, the way of integrity. Few souls select that in these times. Her sire rested a palm upon Josiah's shoulder, a scarce token from one who bore lineages upon his frame. When they at length withdrew, the basin transformed, still barren, still serene, yet bereft of isolation. Josiah fingered the talisman bestowed upon him. A small token, but oft the minest bear the profoundest wisdom. Perhaps that's the moral woven here, that accord demands greater valor than anger, that helping another exacts less than aversion, that a determination forged in obscurity molds your essence come daylight. And perhaps it poses a question to us in our spheres, when a tremor sounds at your portal in anguish. What kind of soul shall you embody? And if you crave further narrations akin, please follow suit. I'd cherish your return here. Now pause a moment, savor your brew, be it joe or infusion, and share whence you're heeding tonight, and the hour it strikes for you presently.